Hello and welcome back to Cogito Ergo Pod, the show where we think, therefore we explore. I am your host Daniel, and before I get started, I just wanted to say two things. Number one, this is my first foray into the world of video for this podcast, so I hope you'll be kind. And secondly, that this episode is dedicated to somebody who we lost quite recently, a friend of my family called Michael, who was an extraordinary theologian and very passionate humanitarian. And for me, he was very important because he spoke at my wedding and he read from the book which I'm dedicating this episode to today. And as such, today we are diving into one of the most cinematic, strange, and deeply moving stories in the Deuterocanonical tradition. If you grew up with a standard Protestant Bible, you might well have missed this one. If you grew up Catholic or Orthodox, you know it as a staple of the wedding liturgy. How appropriate. I'm talking about the Book of Tobit. It's got everything. A blinding by bird droppings, a demon who kills 7 husbands on their wedding nights, a magical fish, and a secret archangel in disguise. It's essentially an ancient Jewish road trip movie. To understand Tobit, we have to look at where it sits in history. While the story is set in the 8th century BCE, during the Neo-Assyrian Empire, most scholars agree the book was actually written much later, likely in the early 2nd century BCE. This makes it a piece of exilic fiction. It's a story written by Jews living in the diaspora, people living far from Jerusalem, struggling to maintain their identity in a foreign land. Our protagonist is Tobit, a man of the tribe of Naphtali. Now, Tobit is the kind of guy who takes his faith very seriously, maybe a little too seriously for his own safety. As we see in Tobit chapter 1, verse 1 to 3, he isn't just a random exile. He's a man who remained faithful to the temple in Jerusalem, even when his own tribe turned to the golden calves of Dan. This is a huge academic theme, the righteous sufferer. Tobit is a modern Job, but where Job's struggle is cosmic and silent, Tobit's struggle is social and legal. While everybody else in Nineveh is assimilating or just trying to keep their heads down, Tobit is out there performing acts of charity. Specifically, he's burying the dead. In Tobit 1, 16 to 18, we see him performing this mitzvah, even though in Nineveh, if the king kills an Israelite and leaves them in the street, it's a capital offense to bury them. Tobit does it anyway, practicing a form of civil disobedience against Sennacherib and asserting that God's law regarding the dignity of a human person supersedes the king's decree. One night, after a particularly grueling day of burying a murdered countryman, Tobit is exhausted. He's ritually impure because he touched a corpse. So he sleeps outside by the wall of his courtyard. As recorded in Tobit 2, 9 to 10, he sleeps with his eyes open. Odd. And sparrows nesting on the wall drop warm dung into his eyes. This causes white scales to form, and despite the efforts of the physicians, Tobit goes completely blind. Academically, this is often interpreted as a test of the pious. Tobit loses his sight not through a grand sin, but through a freak accident following an act of mercy. This leads to a period of deep depression and marital strife. His wife, Anna, has to take up work weaving to support them, and when she's given a goat as a bonus, Tobit, ever the stickler for the law, accuses her of stealing it. Anna, understandably fed up, snaps back at him in Tobit 2:14, basically asking where all his righteousness got him. Tobit is so crushed that he prays for death. But here's where the narrative gets brilliant. The scene cuts away from Nineveh to the city of Ecbatana in Media. There we meet a young woman named Sarah. She's also praying for death. Why? Because she's cursed. She's been married 7 times, and every single time on the wedding night, a demon named Asmodeus kills her husband before the marriage can be consummated. The name Asmodeus likely derives from the Avestan, Aishma Deva, a demon of wrath from Persian Zoroastrianism, which is a smoking gun for historians, showing the influence of Persian culture on Jewish thought during this period. These parallel prayers in Tobit 3 use a sophisticated split-screen technique, showing us that while these characters feel isolated in their grief, God is viewing their suffering as a single connected tapestry. The text tells us that the prayers of both were heard in the glorious presence of God, and he sends the Archangel Raphael, whose name literally means God heals, to help them both. Back in Nineveh, Tobit remembers he left 10 silver talents with a friend in Media. He decides to send his son, Tobias, to go get it, but Tobias needs a guide. In Tobit 5:4, he finds a man standing there looking like a traveller. It's Raphael, but he introduces himself as Azariah, meaning the Lord has helped. For an academic reader, this is a classic Angelus interpres motif, the angel who interprets and guides. The journey that follows is what scholars call a Bildungsroman, a coming-of-age story where Tobias starts as a sheltered boy and returns as a married man and a healer. While they're camping by the Tigris River, a giant fish leaps out of the water. Raphael tells Tobias to gut it and keep the heart, the liver, and the gall. He explains in Tobit 6:7-9 that the smoke from the heart and liver will drive away demons, and the gall will cure blindness. From a historical critical perspective, this reflects the medical magical worldview of the Second Temple period. As they approach Media, Raphael tells Tobias about Sarah. Tobias is terrified, having heard about the 7 dead husbands, but Raphael reassures him. They arrive, the marriage is arranged, and in the bedroom, Tobias follows Raphael's instructions. The stench of the burning fish guts drives Asmodeus all the way to Upper Egypt, where Raphael catches him and binds him. The fact that the demon flees to Egypt is a literary wink. To a Jewish reader in Mesopotamia, Egypt was the traditional land of magic and ancient bondage. The next morning, Sarah's father, Raguel, is shocked and overjoyed to find Tobias alive, as he had already dug a grave for him. They have a massive 14-day wedding feast. When they finally return to Nineveh, Tobias rubs the fish gall on his father's eyes, and the white scales peel away. Tobit can see again. The climax is the big reveal in Tobit 12:15, where Azariah drops the axe and identifies himself as one of the 7 angels who stand ready and enter before the glory of the Lord. This is a foundational text in angelology, telling us how the Second Temple community viewed the celestial court as a structured bureaucracy of grace. If we dive deeper into the textual history, things are getting interesting for bibliophiles out there. For centuries, we primarily knew Tobit through 2 different Greek versions. There is the short version, found in Codex Vaticanus and Codex Alexandrinus, known as GI. Then there is the long version, found in Codex Sinaiticus, known as GII. For a long time, scholars debated which came first. The shorter version is punchy and concise, leading some to think that it was the original. However, the long version is much more detailed, especially regarding the dialogue and the specific geographical markers. The debate was largely settled when the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. Fragments of Tobit were found there, 4 in Aramaic and 1 in Hebrew. These fragments aligned much more closely with the long version of the Sinaiticus. This suggests that the long version is actually a more ancient, authentic tradition, and the short version was likely an abridgment made later to make the story more readable, or maybe using a bit less scrolls. The long version including more Semitic phrasing, which makes sense if the original language of the book was Aramaic or Hebrew rather than Greek. This adds a layer of grit to the story. The longer text emphasizes Tobit's internal struggle and his meticulous adherence to the law in a way the shorter version glosses over. Meanwhile, back at Tobit chapter 13, the book moves from the personal to the prophetic. Tobit breaks into a magnificent hymn of praise, shifting the focus from his own restored sight to the future restoration of Jerusalem. He envisions a city built with sapphires and emeralds, a place where all nations will gather to praise the true king. This transition is vital. It tells the reader that their personal stories of suffering and healing are part of a much larger cosmic restoration. For the people of the diaspora, this was a lifeline, a promise that though they were scattered, they were never truly alone. As we wrap up on the narrative of Tobit, it's worth reflecting on why this story has endured for over 2 millennia. At its heart, the Book of Tobit is a story about divine providence operating within the mundane and the messy. It's a book where the most significant spiritual breakthroughs happen through a fish's gore and the sun's road trip. It asserts that God is not just found in the smoke of the temple, but in the gritty reality of an exile burying a body in an alleyway, or a woman enduring the mockery of her neighbours. The Book of Tobit reminds us that the academic study of religion isn't just looking at old rules. We're looking at how people found meaning in the middle of exile, blindness, and fear. It's a story that asks us to look at the strangers in our own lives with a bit more curiosity. After all, you never know when you might be walking alongside an archangel. That's our deep dive into the Book of Tobit. I hope this journey from Nineveh to Media has given you some food for thought, whether you're interested in the history of the Second Temple period or just a fan of a good ancient thriller. I know Michael was. Thank you for listening to Cogito Ergo Pod. If you enjoyed this episode, consider leaving us a review or sharing it with a fellow traveller. You can also find us on Instagram. Simply search Cogito Ergo Pod. As always, keep questioning, keep reading, and keep thinking. It's what Michael would want you to do. After all, you think, therefore you explore.